We're reading from Luke chapter 4, verses 1 through 13. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, 'Man shall not live on bread alone.'" The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And he said to him, "I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered, "It is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'" The devil led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down from here. For it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone.'" Jesus answered, "It is said, 'Do not put your Lord the God to the test.'" When the devil had finished all this tempting, he left him until an opportune time.
Good morning. Welcome to the first week of Lent. It is upon us. Many of you were at Ash Wednesday, which is super cool. That was awesome. I hope it was a good time for you. I know I got some positive feedback, and it was a good time for me, overall. We're going to be marching towards Easter, right? Over these next 6 weeks, exploring more fully, hopefully, the ideas of transformation. Giving some practical, tangible ways to explore the parts of our lives that aren't working for us and to move forward in freedom and in creativity. It's a time of listening to the things, to the events, to the voices that will give us a chance at transformation. And these voices can come from anywhere, right? That's why we have to be so careful to listen. I was driving this week on Hillsborough, headed home, and going the speed limit, normal thing, paying attention, which is good. And all of a sudden, as I'm approaching like a turn-in for like a business, there's a car like waiting. I see the car waiting, but it pulls out in front of me, just like pulls out in front of me, right? And I'm not talking about just, oh, come on, now I'm right up on his tail. That was too close for comfort, man. Right? That's enough to make us angry sometimes. But I'm talking like I had to swerve into the next lane to avoid crashing into the side of this car. Right? Like I'm coming like this, right there, right in front of me. Swerve out of the way. Luckily, there's no one in the lane next to me. Avoid an accident. Adrenaline's racing. I say something to relieve the adrenaline rush. And then I say, "Idiot!" And Braylon, in the back seat, says, "Daddy, don't call him an idiot." And I go right to the Cain response. Remember last week? "Am I my brother's keeper?" I say, "Did you see what he just did? We could have gotten a terrible accident. We all could have been killed." Probably not killed, but right? We all could have been very injured. And he says, "But you still shouldn't call him an idiot because you wouldn't want someone to call you an idiot." Jesus slam! Right? He hit me straight across the face with the golden rule. Like a sack of golden rules. Just boom. Crushed my skull with it. So I'm laying flat on my back after being Jesus slammed by a 6-year-old. And I realize, oh my gosh, he's 100% right. Like 100% right. So, sometimes in these moments, the temptation is to be like, he doesn't know how the world works yet, right? It's a lot tougher place than the golden rule. He doesn't get it yet. Like, he's only 6. But I didn't do that. I realized that I don't want people calling me an idiot. I don't want people harboring ill will towards me. I don't know this guy's situation. Like, maybe this could have been the honest mistake and the first one he ever made in his life. Right? He could have the perfect driving record. He may have looked and just didn't see me. Some strange phenomena of physics. I don't know how light works. Maybe he's really bad. Maybe he's a really terrible driver and a very irresponsible person and does this kind of stuff all the time. But none of those possibilities get to determine how I react to the situation, right? What do I have to gain from being angry and then justifying my anger? I do have something to gain. Right? We all have something to gain from these responses. It wouldn't be so appealing and natural for us if we didn't get some kind of payoff from it. It's a little bit what we'll be looking at today as we explore the story of Jesus in the wilderness. And it's going to be another invitation to let ourselves be instructed, to be decentered, to clear enough space within ourselves so that we can hear the voice of a child, perhaps, or a stranger, or someone guiding us into what we know to be right. If you recall, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about this idea of sin. I unpacked it as this principle of exclusion, cutting ourselves off from ourselves, cutting ourselves off from other people, the principle behind broken relationships. We saw that it's universal. That is, it has to be dealt with in some way by everybody. We looked at these texts that kind of lament the fact that no one maintains innocence throughout their lives. At one point or another, we've all ended up giving into this destructive principle around us. And as we look at things for the way they are, we find that this idea of exclusion, of pushing people out, of violently separating ourselves, of living with ourselves in a fractured, split way, seems to be bound up in the very way we make identities for ourselves. So we looked at the fact that in order to exist, right, to be an individual, we first realize that we're not someone else. Right? I'm not you and you're not me. It seems pretty obvious, but it's really important to keep in our minds. As we begin to move through life as small children and we realize that we're under threat of collapsing into what someone else says about us, we're not feeling secure in what we are because we realize that, life is essentially living under the judging eye of another person. We all judge each other, don't we? Not always with malicious intent, right? But we're always sizing each other up. We're always meeting people and asking, friend or foe, right? At the base of it all. What is this other person trying to achieve, and how is it at my expense? And these concerns, among others, are not always vocalized. You don't think these things explicitly. But it's how we operate. It's the place we move from, these types of questions. What's demanded of me from this person? How does this person expect me to be? And in the face of those questions, right, these demands that we all naturally kind of feel from others and that we put on others as well, there's this need to remain strong, to push back, to feel protected, to feel secure, right? That's a natural thing. It's not bad in and of itself, but for some reason we always tend to want to not just remain who we are, but to turn the tables, right? To dominate the other person, to make them into our image of them before they do that to us. And that's what we saw in the story of Cain and Abel. Cain had this story that he had internalized for himself. Remember, Eve named him producer, and so he goes and goes and goes, and he works hard, and he keeps the family together, and he's God's gift to the family. And Abel is named Vapor, and he just tends the flocks, and he's not talked about that much. And why should he be? He doesn't work as hard as I do. And the minute that that narrative is thrown off, questioned, shown to not be ultimate, Cain loses it. He decides to exert his dominance once and for all and kill his brother. But before that happens, there's this moment, if you recall, where we get to witness the turn from the kind of natural pain of loss of an identity to the destructive, dominating tendency. And in this space, we see Cain sad, brooding, defeated. And God says, hey, it doesn't have to be this way, right? Like, look, sin's at the door, like an animal ready to pounce. But you've got a choice. Own it. Take responsibility for it. It's a great metaphor. It's so tangible. Sin like crouching, right? We're moving through life. We've got all these stories that when we were 3, 6, 15 were made up by us, right? Like 3-year-old you told yourself something about you, and 6-year-old you told yourself something about you, and 15-year-old you told yourself something about you. Do you trust a 3-year-old on a lot of issues? I don't go to 3-year-olds for advice a whole lot. And yet 3-year-old me runs the show. Makes no sense. But anyway, we've got these stories that we take with us, and something comes along and challenges those stories, and then sin's like, pokes his head around the corner. Oh, what? Was your identity challenged? Hey, come here. No. Your father didn't love you. And you had to be strong because of that. You're a fighter. Look what you've done in life. You don't let people say those things to you. Destroy her. Right? It goes from this this is who you are because of all these things you have. And if someone challenges it, kill them. Kill them now. I hope that's sinister. Does that sound sinister? Now, for most of us, there's no space like this, right? It just happens. Something comes our way, and we just react automatically. In real life, Cain just kills Abel. God doesn't typically step in and have these conversations. Most of the time, it feels like the things we choose towards other people, right? The sin we do is just thrust upon us. I had to call him an idiot. He pulled out in front of me. What choice did I have in the matter? He is an idiot. If he wasn't an idiot, I wouldn't call him that, right? It's forced on us. Our angry reactions, right? Our acts of destruction, whether huge like murder or small, like lashing out at somebody, they feel logical to us. And that's because they are logical, right? They flow naturally from the stories and identities that we're working with. It feels natural to protect ourselves. But they aren't truly natural. You're not born with this stuff. You picked it up along the way. There's nothing wrong with that. But what's wrong is when we relinquish our responsibility in the face of those things. We relinquish our responsibility to the things we picked up along the way. Because doing that leaves us, at best, unfulfilled, unhappy, defeated, resigned, tired, and at worst, destructive, violent, dominating, trapped, powerless. That doesn't sound right. There it is. So today's text shines more light on this functioning of sin. And it explores this idea of temptation, right? You heard it said 3 times. The devil tempted Jesus. And sometimes when we use the word temptation, we use it to describe this feeling of the moments where perhaps you have a level of clarity and yet something's pulling you into something that you know is destructive, but you still kind of want it. Call it temptation if it's desirable, but we know we shouldn't do it. And that's certainly part of what Jesus is going through here. But the word behind this word tempted, right, it has more of an idea of like a test, a trial. Let's see what you're made of, Jesus. Let's see the fortitude you've got. A lot of people view this passage in this way as well. You've probably heard it taught that way, the classic troll under the bridge type story. In order for Jesus to move on to what he wants to do, he's got to do 3 riddles. Unfortunately, sometimes some stuff gets lost in that, right? We look at Satan being tricky by trying to use the Bible, and the answer is, but Jesus knew the Bible better, right? Have you ever heard that? Jesus was so smart, he had studied so hard that he could use the Bible better than Satan used the Bible. It's not exactly what's going on here, right? The story doesn't carry a lot of weight for us if we just see it as something that Jesus, a technicality he had to pass along the way, that he really had no chance of failing. I think we should blend both the connotations of the word temptation here, right? The test of all this is exactly how desirable it is. When we look at the story, we'll find that the things that Satan's going after here are very much in line with what we've discovered so far about the nature of sin. Look at the first thing that Satan said to Jesus. If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread. If you are the Son of God. What is Satan bringing up here? He's trying to question Jesus' identity. The reasonableness about acting from within his identity. This is exactly what we've been seeing. The way sin functions. If you are the Son of God. Why is that being brought up? How does this, if you just open the Luke chapter 4 and just say, Satan's suddenly here and why are we in the wilderness, whatever, right? Well, if you go back, the story before this is Jesus being baptized in the Jordan River. He was baptized by John, right? John the Baptizer, this prophet who was a relative of Jesus's. And what John was proclaiming to the people here was a movement of national renewal. Like he's saying to the people, hey, Israel, we lost our way. We've forsaken justice. We've forsaken rightness. And it's time to recommit to being who we should be. So come be baptized in the Jordan. And the idea is that just as Israel passed from the wilderness into the promised land through Jordan, they were doing it again. They're re-entering into the promised land. And Jesus, John's relative, if you remember the Christmas stories, joins this movement. He's baptized. When he comes out of the water, a voice says, this is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And then a dove descends on him. Right? The dove is the imagery of the Spirit of God coming upon Jesus. And the phrase Son of God comes from the prophetic tradition. And it was the title of those who spoke God's word to the people and were faithful to God's will before the people. So that's a whole lot of backstory, isn't it? I mean, I just tried to cram it in a few sentences, but, get a Bible, it's like 1,000, 1,500 pages. And Jesus stands in this tradition. We talk about Jesus as the second Adam, and we talk about Jesus as the second Abel. But in this moment, Jesus is the second Cain, right? Because he's faced with this choice. You're here to guide everyone, Jesus. You're the prophet, finally here to save us. You're chosen by God. You stand in the line of Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. That's a lot to live up to. You think your family had expectations for you? Nothing compared to this. Cain was named producer. All he had to do was be a good farmer. Jesus' name means deliverer of the people. Savior. You think Mary ever said to him when he was young, that's not how Yeshua would act, right? You think he ever overheard the story? You think he ever, listened to Mary having tea or... Do they drink tea? They drink tea, right? Yeah. Tea. With a friend. Man, I remember that day he was born, or the 8 days after he was born, and we took him to the temple, and this old prophetess said, my eyes have finally seen the deliverance of my people. And he's 6, listening to that, oh man, right? That's a lot. And now, he's taken on that vocation. He's fasting in the wilderness. He hasn't eaten for 40 days. He's hungry, he's tired. And the voices begin. If you're really this prophet, you need your strength. Turn those stones into bread. You've heard the stories. Some of the prophets were fed by ravens, and some of them with magical oil that never ran out, right? You can do the bread thing too. I'm sure God will allow it, if you're really his anointed. And they become more extreme, right? As you heard. But is it such a big deal to eat? Is it morally inherently wrong to eat? Of course not. But what we learn from this, right, is that any abdication of our own responsibility in the face of reasons based on our identities is to begin walking down the wrong path. Jesus is fasting here. He chose it. It was something he was doing. It's a discipline, right? The minute he forsakes that choice, because he's earned it as God's son, is the minute he begins to lose ground. We've all felt this, right? Giving ourselves back doors to things that we've committed to, setting up conditions to quit on things we really do want to do. And that's never satisfying. We don't like where that gets us. So how did we get there? Usually if you examine an action like that, it's based on something that comes from protecting who you are. Sin is letting go of our freedom to choose in the face of our identities. Next, we see this desire to prove to ourselves that we are who we say we are. So Satan says, if you are the Son of God, again, going after the identity, throw yourself off the top of the temple. You know the stories, Jesus. There's even a whole psalm about it. God will save you if you're really that important. He won't let his anointed fall to their death. Playing on the potential that Jesus is trying to keep an identity, a story of himself intact. Interestingly, Jesus doesn't seem concerned at all about that, right? And it's from that lack of concern that we have so much to learn. Jesus never once replies to Satan by appealing to being the Son of God. Notice that? Like, if you are the Son of God, then do this. Well, actually, because I'm the Son of God, I'll do this. Not there. What he does do is appeals to the things he's committed to. He appeals to his vocation, appeals to his prior commitments. What does Son of God do? What does prophet do? Stays faithful to God's call. Lives the life of faith. Jesus has the vocation. He has the things he believes are right. And that's what he appeals to. Eat this bread if you're the Son of God. Humans aren't sustained simply by eating, but by faithfulness to God's message. Throw yourself off this thing and see if God catches you, if he really loves you. Faith doesn't put God to the test. It's open and it moves freely. Worship me, and you can achieve all the kingdoms of the world and have all the power you need to do the things you want to do. I'm not committed to power. I'm committed to people. Right? Like, he appeals to the things he's already created. He appeals to his life of faith. Here's a radical idea. Jesus jumps from the temple. I think he dies when he hits the ground. The moment he turns the stones into bread, the moment he worships, gives ultimacy to the one accusing him, the moment that he lives from his story and identity is the moment he loses his identity. It feels counterintuitive, but remember, that's the defining marker of sin, something that promises to keep your story and your identity intact, but actually destroys it. Right? Is being a producer for your family a good thing? Sure. Protecting himself from that for that story gave Cain, right, the actions that tore his family apart. Save your family, destroy your family. Is being the Son of God a good thing? Absolutely. But protecting that identity will destroy it. Living from our commitments can let our identities flourish, but protecting our identities will destroy what we're committed to. Next week, we'll look a little bit at how to view ourselves in this way from the words of Paul, who says, in the face of our identities, live as if you are not them. But today, the call is threefold. First, you got to get into the wilderness, right, to hear that voice, to hear Satan. Like I said earlier, so often our natural way, the thing that feels natural because it's so immediate, is to live in defense of our identities, or to appeal to them in the face of accusation. I want you to just sit with the impact of that for a second, because I really do think that's where most of us live, right? When we get attacked, we don't appeal to the things we're committed to. We appeal to the attack on our identity. I do it almost exclusively. Almost exclusively. We need to take time to sit and listen to voices that are asking us, whether good or bad, to act from a place of protecting our identities. These voices may come from outside, they may come from inside. And rather than run or ignore them, we have to face them. Right? There's no shortcut to transformation. There's no promised land without the wandering. Reflect. Each day, this week, reflect on interactions that stuck out to you. If an interaction stuck out to you, whether it's good or bad, reflect on it. Why did you act the way you did in that scenario? Was it because you told yourself that you were being threatened? Were you appealing to an identity you had for yourself? As you reflect in the space that opens up there, you'll begin to find freedom to act from the way you want to act, rather than just being enslaved to the reasons protecting your identity. Let's commit to doing this together this week.